Beerus the Destroyer is arguably one of the strongest characters in anime history, being able to destroy planets with the greatest of ease and throwing punches that can destroy entire solar systems, galaxies, and universes. So with me being a massive stan for the overpowered character trope, I decided I would do a what if on Izuku having the powers of a god of destruction, since I've already given him the powers of an angel before and even an angry Saiyan. So with all my yapping out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, grab your snacks, grab your popcorn, like the video, and enjoy. We begin our story on the day of Izuku's birth. Now, Izuku is not exactly going to be just like every other kid, because there's going to be one thing different about him. Izuku's going to be born with the Shoyo Ki and all of the power of Beerus. This is not going to be one of those videos where I give Izuku some elements of Hakai energy. This is going to be Izuku with the full power that Beerus has at his disposal. We're talking the full fanfiction power that he supposedly has, because Beerus in the manga says that he's still more powerful than Goku. And Goku at this point, well, he already has Ultra Instinct, so that's just going to give you guys a little glimpse as to what Izuku's going to be having within himself. From the moment that Izuku was born, you would just know that something was different about him. The day that he was born, like right out the womb, fresh out of there, Izuku was crying, and because he started crying, the hospital was literally shaking. It was trembling. In fact, the power of the hospital itself went out, and people had to go to the generators just to turn it back on. So that just gives you a glimpse as to just how powerful this dude is. And not only that, but growing up, when Izuku would throw little temper tantrums that kids usually do, it would not be good at all. Not for the house, not for the neighborhood, for Japan. Like, it was bad. When Izuku started throwing little temper tantrums, literally all of Japan would shake. The closer you were to Izuku's vicinity, the more shaking there was. So the people that were near his house literally had to make their houses earthquake proof, because anytime that this dude would get mad, it was bad for his house and it was bad for all of those around him. So this dude is he's very busted. So let's say that he was fighting somebody like a Nomu and he straight up just flared up his aura, that thing would go flying like a rag doll. We're talking when Cell was powering up and all the Z fighters had all the wind shooting at them and they were straight up getting blown back. That's how crazy his power is. It's genuinely insane. At this point of the story, Izuku at 4 years old, just say 4 years old, he could already destroy the planet with if he was to let out his full power, that by itself. In fact, Izuku can already tap on the Earth's crust, and if he puts any energy into it, he could straight up obliterate it entirely. So because of this, Izuku would have a lot different of a childhood than many other kids. While in the original, Izuku was pretty much taught most of his value systems and his personality came from his mother, in this specific timeline, Izuku's going to be having all of that hammered onto him even more, just due to the fact that Inko understands that her child is extremely powerful. With power comes great responsibility. Shout out Spider-Man. Oh, speaking of Spider-Man, I have a bunch of Spider-Man what ifs with Deku. I have Miles Morales, I have normal Spider-Man, then I have another Spider-Man, then I have Venom. I think I might even have a Carnage video, or was that Izuku? I don't know. It might have been me. I don't know. But the point is, I have a lot of Spider-Man videos, so go check those out. But that's not the point. Point is, Izuku is very powerful. Because of this, his mom pretty much makes him understand, okay, look, son, you have a very powerful quirk. You need to not show it as much because it genuinely has potential to destroy everything. So by the time that Izuku would turn the age of 4 years old, he would already be a very passive and timid kid. One, because he has to be, and two, because let's be honest, that's just kind of the way that Izuku was raised up. I mean, nurture over nature, right? Not nature over nurture in this case. So Izuku grew up like that. But the one change that will come to the story very early on that I do think it is really important to be addressed to the story is the fact that Izuku and Bakugo's friendship is never gonna fall off. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a character analysis on Bakugo, but if you haven't, let me explain why Bakugo was such a jerk to Izuku. All his life, he had pretty much told that he was perfect. He was told that he was gonna do everything. He was told, he was lifted up so unbelievably high that when somebody who he deemed to be lower than himself looked at him as if they were equals, this really boiled Bakugo's blood. That's why he bullied him. That's why he pushed him down. In fact, he even says as much in the manga, saying that for some reason, he always thought that Izuku was ahead of him. So if that doesn't make sense, now it does. But in this specific timeline, because Izuku has so much power, and there's been times where he literally will get upset and the classroom would shake, Bakugo is very aware, okay? Izuku has a quirk. So because of that, Izuku and Bakugo would stay friends, and Izuku, still being the shy and timid kid that he is, would always just watch Bakugo, telling him how great he is and making Bakugo feel like he's that guy. But in reality, his lackey was the guy who was the strongest all along. Kind of like a Beerus and Whis kind of thing, like ironically. But yeah, because of that, Izuku would grow up having this sort of subconscious lock on his quirk, not wanting to use it because of the fact that whenever his Hakai aura or like destruction energy comes out, things do get destroyed. In fact, at one point when Izuku was very, very young, he straight up sneezed and accidentally sneezed away his bed out of existence. He destroyed it entirely. So his mom had to do that, and one thing that became a very normal occurrence for Izuku was him literally just destroying random things in the house. At one point, Izuku was literally watching the TV, right? And like he just had to sneeze again. Like one of the things that I really need to make clear is when Izuku will sneeze and stuff like that, something's getting destroyed. Whether it be his clothes, because he's gonna block it with the shirt, which, you know, that means that he has to have a lot of clothes, and I do mean a lot. So Izuku will just go around destroying things by accident, but luckily for him, he's never had the unfortunate situation of having an anime backstory where he was born and straight up killed his parents, and in fact the hospital he was born in. And I'm not gonna lie, I was actually thinking of making Izuku's backstory something like that, but I was just like, it's so convoluted, let me just stick to my guns. So now we have this. Anyways, point being, Izuku, very powerful. Everyone else, not exactly that powerful. Point is, though, we continue on with the story, and what's going to happen with Izuku? How is he going to grow up? How are Bakugo and Izuku going to have like their relationship? Well, in this specific timeline, they're going to grow up being friends, obviously, like I said, and because of this, they're both pretty much just going to get to middle school with no real problems. Izuku doesn't get bullied at all in this timeline because A, he hangs out with Bakugo, and B, Bakugo's not bullying him. So this version of Izuku is shy and kind of like quiet a bit, you know, but he's a nice kid. He's nice. He's not like shy or like or kind of like a bully. He doesn't give off bullied kid energy, more like just like the quiet kid that you don't want to mess with energy, I guess you could say, right? But at the end of the day, he tries to fit in as much as he can because all his life he has sort of stuck out like a sore thumb. You know what I mean? But the point is that Izuku, because he has this personality, Bakugo would absolutely hate it. Because obviously now they're in middle school and they've had more than a couple of years to train with each other. But because Izuku's been training with Bakugo, this version of Bakugo would be so much more powerful than the one that we have in the original. Number one, because of the fact that he has Izuku and he knows that he's stronger than him. And number two, because Izuku is so unbelievably durable that when Bakugo throws full power explosions at him, Izuku's body is literally unfazed. Like, it feels like he's getting tickled by a feather when this dude throws an explosion at him. Worst case scenario, Izuku's clothes get tattered. But Izuku's sort of so used to that he doesn't care. So whenever they train in combat, Izuku has to hold himself back so unbelievably much as to literally not accidentally punch a hole through Bakugo. So Izuku would grow up kind of being bored with a little bit of that Saitama energy, just because it's like, he wishes he had somebody to pose a challenge to him. And the one thing that Izuku's always wanted was to have a challenge posed to him, but at the same time, he's grateful because he knows when he does become a hero, he's going to save so many people due to his incredible power. And at the end of the day, he's not trying to become a hero so he could fight strong bad guys, but so he could save lives, so he could make a difference in the world. So Izuku doesn't mind if he has to be a little, you know, a little stronger than everybody else. It's not really something that's bothering him too much. But Bakugo literally loves training with Izuku because he's able to throw full power explosions at him whenever, go full throttle, and Bakugo is very, very skilled at hand-to-hand combat. His explosions are like 4 times stronger than the ones that we get in the original because Bakugo had so many years of extra training that none of the other students at UA will possibly have. We're talking like War Arc level Bakugo strength at the beginning of the story. Entrance exam middle school Bakugo is that strong. He's already developed incredible moves, and one thing that definitely has happened through the midst of their training is Bakugo going full out and kind of just noticing that Izuku looked a bit bored, so he would push Deku, being like, "Deku, how many times do I have to tell you to stop acting weak? You gotta act as you are, strong. Being strong doesn't mean that like, it's just something that Baku would say, you know, pretty much telling him like, dude, Just because you're strong doesn't mean you have to act so freaking weak. Throwing an explosion at the direction of Izuku's face, who, gets blown back a bit and would just be like, dang it, Bakugo, it got in my eye again. Like, that's the only pain Izuku ever feels, right? And Bakugo's like, good, that's the point. Izuku got a little annoyed and said, shut up. And then as, he started inhaling, Izuku accidentally straight up sneezed past Bakugo and proceeded to destroy something right behind him. As Bakugo sees that, he would question Izuku on why in the world he doesn't just use that energy that he's able to shoot out. And Izuku says because he does, he'll probably kill everything around here. And Bakugo, hearing that, would be like, as if, let me see. As suddenly Izuku would say, fine, you asked for it, as he would hold one finger out in front of him and shoot an energy blast similar to a death beam that Frieza shoots, right? It's like a little orb of Hakai. And he would shoot it and Bakugo narrowly dodges it. We're talking like it barely doesn't graze his hair. And I'm not talking about like his like long hair, but like the hairs on his face, like that peach fuzz that we all have, it grazes that. And so right after it goes by him, Bakugo would be terrified because he could have sworn that he almost like felt like he was about to literally not exist. But in that moment, he turned back around and all the trash that was on Dagoma Beach, which is where they trained because of so much trash and garbage that no one goes there anymore, he would realize that that entire side of the beach was literally perfectly clean now. And he would pretty much go on to tell Izuku that's not okay. This dude almost died. From here, Izuku would go on to apologize profusely to Bakugo, say he's so sorry that this is why he never uses his power, because he could straight up kill someone, and Bakugo would say that having that much firepower must be kind of scary, huh? I mean, he has some crazy power, but he's able to control it, but it looks like Izuku's completely unable to do that. So Bakugo would be like, kind of lame if you ask me. If I had your quirk, I'd be the strongest hero already. No need to go to UA. I'd be taking bad guys out left and right. And Izuku would say, yeah, I probably could do that, but I mean, I really don't want to get in trouble, Bakugo. I want to become a hero just like All Might. And to do that, I gotta go to UA, to his school. As from here, Bakugo would say, yeah, whatever, Deku. Well, anyways, let's go home. As the two of them would make their way home, and stuff like this would be regular. It's not something random or like a different occasion that's going down. This is just the normal Deku and Bakugo stuff. After this, they would go to school, and about 2 weeks later, they would finally find themselves in their class when their teacher finally says, all right, guys, I was going to give you guys some career aptitude tests, but I know you all want to become heroes! Throwing the papers up into the air, everybody just starts going crazy using their quirks, having a great old time, until finally, Bakugo would say something. And he would say something along the lines of, come on, Teach. Don't lump us in with the rest of these losers. Me and Izuku are gonna go to UA, and we're gonna become the greatest and richest heroes there's ever been. As he would stand up on the desk and be like, right, Izuku? And Izuku would be like, yeah. As Bakugo hearing this would like pause and be like, damn it, Izuku, you're supposed to back me up on this stuff. Why do you gotta be so freaking lame? As from here, like that's sort of the relationship that they have. Like Bakugo knows that Izuku's so strong and he should carry himself in such a different way, but Izuku's just always so timid and humble about everything, and that just boils Bakugo's blood. So right after class would be done, Bakugo would be like, dang it, Deku, you embarrassed me. As from here, Izuku would say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. But Bakugo would be like, it's whatever. I'm the one that messed up for thinking you'd back me up. As he'd say, look, tomorrow let's go to the arcade, yeah? Today I'm gonna go out with, the two names of the lackeys that he has. As Izuku says bye to all three of them and says to have fun. As, Izuku makes his way home through his normal path that he would have taken in canon. And taking that path, Izuku would think to himself, Bakugo's right. I need to start acting a bit different if I'm gonna be a hero. All Might wouldn't be timid. All Might loves the limelight. And thinking about this, Izuku just walks down the tunnel going, ah, like he does in the original, but obviously for different circumstances. And as this is happening, Izuku would just be like looking behind him as suddenly the sludge villain would appear right behind Izuku. Seeing this, Izuku would be like, oh, that thing's disgusting. As the sludge villain says, I didn't know that freak was in town. And seeing Izuku would say, thank you, my hero. As from here, he would proceed to go on to latch onto Izuku, but Izuku, not being able to breathe, gets frustrated, and so he lets out his aura just a bit, causing the sludge phone to splatter everywhere. He hit him with twice the force of All Might's Texas Smash, just by sparking his aura, as the sludge film would be sent splattering everywhere. And as Izuku's looking at it, wondering why this guy's using his quirk for evil, he would finally see All Might jumping out of the sewers in all of his glory, as Izuku starts immediately freaking out, being like, "It's All Might!" He runs up to him and he's all like, "Oh my, can I get an autograph? Can I get an autograph?" And All Might's just like, I love my fans, giving him an autograph and being like, "Say kid, what happened to the sludge villain?" As Izuku just points at him, he's like, "He's over there and there and there and there and a little bit over there." And All Might's just like, "Kid, did you do that?" And Izuku says, "Yeah, he was kind of bothering me, so I used my quirk a bit. Sorry about that, but he was trying to suffocate me." As All Might would say, "No, it's completely fine. Kid, what is your quirk?" As Izuku, realizing that he had been too much of a fanboy and hearing the words of Bakugo in his head telling him what a loser, Izuku's just like, "Name's Izuku Midoriya, sir. I'm gonna become a hero just like you. In fact, I'll probably become the #1 hero." He'd be like low-key hurting inside saying stuff like that to All Might, be like, "Oh, what if he thinks I'm cringy? You know, I'm not good at this like Bakugo is." As All Might would say, "Wow, kid, well, I hope you do. You certainly must have a strong quirk to be able to take this villain out." As Izuku looks at him and just goes, "Yeah, it's pretty strong. Say, All Might, I do have one question." He goes back to being a little nerdy. He's like, "I was wondering, I've always been so much stronger than everybody else, and I've never had a challenge in my life. I just wanted to know if there's any way that you could punch me." As All Might would look at him and be like, "Punch you?" And Izuku says, "Please, just one punch to the stomach. I promise I could take it. My quirk gives me some crazy durability. In fact, I'd be willing to wager that I could tank a bomb explosion right to the face." As, you know, All Might would, after hearing this, would be like, "Well, I mean, if you say so, kid, but you promise you won't get hurt?" And Izuku says, "Please, All Might, I promise. I just want to know how strong you are. In fact, I feel like you're the only one that could probably pose this challenge to me." As All Might, after hearing that, would be like, "All right, well, here's me at 10%. He punches him and Izuku's just standing there going, "Could you do it a little harder?" All Might goes 50% right after seeing that Izuku is durable. In fact, his hand hurt from hitting him. After that, he would hit him at 50%, and All Might, his hand would literally be red. Izuku's stomach is just normal, and Izuku would look at him and say, "Thanks so much, All Might. I appreciate you holding back for me." As you know, he basically goes on to thank him so much for his autograph, and then just leave the area, as All Might would just be sitting there going, "I literally hit this kid at half my current power, and my hand is the one that hurts. I'm the one in pain." All Might would just be thinking to himself that kid is a literal monster. Like, as he walks away, it's almost like All Might can see an aura behind him of just like destruction, like a power that is unbridled, uncontrollable, just a monster, you know? And Izuku just walking home thinking to himself that he's so glad he got to meet All Might, but on the other hand, he's kind of upset because, if he's being honest, he thought that would hurt or something, but he really didn't feel it. It kind of tickled, if he's being honest. But what would pretty much happen after this is that he would go on to just be like, well, he probably wasn't going half as strong as he was saying, just hoping that maybe he, you know, was holding back a lot more than he thought. And, you know, he would go home smiling and be like, "Yeah, All Might doesn't need to hit me with all of his strength. In fact, why would he? He's the #1 hero. He probably thought I'd get hurt." So he starts laughing and be like, "Yeah, All Might's still the greatest. There's no way I'm as strong as him." As, you know, he's kind of wrong. But eventually the day of the entrance exams would finally come around, and when this happens, we would pretty much just get basic events. Izuku and Bakugo walk into the test arena, they take their exam, and then they make their way towards separate robot portions, right? Because of this, Izuku would end up seeing that there's a really nervous girl towards the front, and trying to go over towards her to pretty much tell her not to worry about things, he would be interrupted by a boy with blue hair telling him, "Hey, you can't go over there and distract that girl." To which Izuku turns towards him with a huge smile and says, "Hey, I wasn't really trying to distract her. But Ida cuts him off, saying he doesn't like people like him, he needs to focus on his own exam." And Izuku, looking at him, would just be like, Right, as you know, he kind of looks down nervous, and suddenly we would finally hear President Mike, "What are you guys doing? There's no countdowns in a real battle, go, go, go!" As the gate opens, but because it's opening so slow, Izuku just straight up flies over into the air, and seeing a bunch of robots, Izuku holds one finger out, realizing that because these things are robots, he can finally practice his quirk. So using his power at like 0.01%, Izuku would shoot a little ki beam from his hand, obliterating like 27 robots instantly. In fact, there was people who were rushing towards them, but now they're just looking up, seeing all these purple little energy blasts coming down and just obliterating these 0-pointers. Izuku thinks to himself that that's enough of that, as he would fly towards the rest of them and just punch straight through them on some Superman type timing, you know? Eventually, Izuku would finally fly up into the air, thinking to himself that that probably should be enough, as suddenly the ground begins to rumble and Izuku notices that everybody's running away. Izuku's like senses would be off the charts crazy, so he can just see how scared everyone is, and he can hear Araraka saying, "Help, help," because you know she's trapped under some rubble, right? So Izuku, seeing this, would fly over towards the direction of the 0-pointer and wonder if he can throw that thing. So Izuku literally, the 0-pointer would try to throw a punch at Izuku, but Izuku holds his hand out, crushing the arm of the, the little area where the 0-pointer did that, as he would grab it by the arm, flying into the air so fast that no one even sees the 0-pointer disappear, as it would be thrown into the stratosphere, as Izuku generates a bunch of ki, shaking the area and causing a purple hue to overfall the entire surrounding area, as Izuku opens his mouth and shoots a mouth ki beam straight at the direction of the 0-pointer, obliterating it in space, mind you, causing the coolest purple looking fireworks ever to go out. And seeing this on the intercoms, seeing this on the cameras, Nezu would be like, this dude is so unbelievably excited that a prospect quite this incredible came to their school that he would immediately ask Izuku to meet him right after this. And as Izuku makes it to the ground and asks Araraka if she's okay, she'd be like, "How did you do that?" As Izuku says, "It's my quirk." And she's like, "Right, you have flight and you have super strength or something?" And he says, "No, nothing like that. I can just shoot energy out." And she's like, "Then how are you flying and doing all those things?" And he's just like, "Well, I guess it comes with the quirk." As you know, as this is happening, Nezu himself comes out to greet Izuku, saying, "Greetings, I'm Principal Nezu. Would you care to have some tea with me?" And Izuku, hearing that this is Nezu, he'd be scared, being like, "Oh no, what did I do?" He's super worried, making his way to the principal's office. And as he sits down, Nezu looks at him and says, "Your performance during the entrance exam was quite incredible. In fact, I'd like to offer you a full-time scholarship to this place, and we'll pay you just to come here." As Izuku, hearing this, would be like, You what now?" As Nezu would be like, "You heard me right. We would love for you to attend UA High. In fact, you're already in." As he would say, "What do you say, Izuku?" And Izuku would say, "What do I say? What do I say?" Immediately following the events of the last part, Izuku now finds himself in the office with Nezu, who just asked him what he thinks about this. Izuku from here, absolutely flabbergasted, goes on and pretty much tell him yes to everything. And this is where Nezu proceeds to explain that not only is he going to be attending UA, but he's going to be receiving special training. Nezu tells him that he sees him having the same potential as somebody like All Might, and not only is Izuku going to go to their school, but his expedition process, or the process of getting him from here to becoming an actual hero, is gonna be insanely supercharged. Izuku doesn't have to go through a full 3 years of this school. In fact, they're gonna make sure that Izuku becomes a pro hero and a top 10 one within 2 years. He can promise him that. After hearing this, Izuku would be like, "Don't you think that's doing a little much?" As Nezu would say, "Absolutely not, boy. I mean, sometimes things just have to be done for the greater good, and you will be saving many lives. Don't you think that that's more worthwhile than staying here in school with a couple of friends?" Izuku, after hearing that, would think to himself that yeah, saving people is more important than other stuff. So he would pretty much look at Nezu and say he's going to be happy to work with him. Nezu would go on to smile and tell him that the next day, or actually not even the next day, what is he talking about? They could do it today. Today he's going to be meeting all the teachers in UA. They were supposed to have a meeting about an hour ago, but Nezu was a little busy speaking with him. Izuku and Nezu from here would make their way towards the teacher's lounge, like where they have their little meetings, and Nezu goes on to introduce Izuku. All of the heroes there are pretty much like ready to like praise Izuku and tell him that like they're expecting great things from him, except for Aizawa, who would pretty much look at Izuku and be like, "Hey kid, alright, so you're the one with the massive potential. Well, I hope that you don't disappoint us because I'm gonna be your homeroom teacher." From here, Izuku, after hearing that, he would think to himself that this guy seems like a bit of a stick in the mud, but whatever, he's gonna be teaching him all the things that he needs to know, so he better put a smile on and shake his hand. So he'd be like, "Well, I'm happy to meet you, Aizawa. My name is Izuku Midoriya." But before he can finish saying that, Aizawa would say, "Yeah, I know your name, kid. Sit down." As from here, Izuku would go on to sit and just be like, "Alright, I'm gonna just stay quiet." As, you know, we would pretty much just have a meeting go down. They all explain their roles. And Izuku from here would be told that the very next day, Izuku's gonna have to come in for some training because school's gonna start in a week. So instead of Izuku having that week off to just do whatever he wants, he's actually gonna have to be in the school, literally training with the pro heroes off rip. So instead of having the first crazy event that Izuku takes part in be like the heroes versus villains training or even the USJ, Izuku's gonna have to straight up fight a full-on pro hero. And the first one that he's gonna get to is ectoplasm. The reason that Nezu would choose ectoplasm is due to the nature of the fact that, ectoplasm, one, can make clones which won't get hurt, so Izuku's free to use his destruction energy and actually go full throttle on them. And B, ectoplasm's able to produce a bunch of them, meaning that Izuku's gonna be able to go on and on and on. And not only is he going to be fighting ectoplasm, but he's also going to be fighting robots. Now, these robots are also going to be trying to absolutely destroy him. And it's not just going to be 1, 2, and 3 pointers, but there's going to be like 10 0-pointers that are all just trying to absolutely destroy him. As Izuku's just going through these training grounds and trying his best to not get hit, Nezu pretty much tells him to try to take them all out as fast as he possibly can. And while obviously Izuku could just charge up his Hakai energy and pretty much cause everything around him to be destroyed, he doesn't exactly want to destroy millions and millions of dollars of property damage. So Izuku decides, you know what, I'll take them all out one by one. Plus, this gives me a better chance to practice my control over the destruction energy in a better way. This way, instead of Izuku being able to shoot these Hakai, like these destruction beams that would normally, like if making contact with somebody, would just instantly eradicate them from existence, instead it would eradicate that specific part from existence. So let's say that you have a gun, you're holding it up to Izuku, and he shoots a Hakai energy at your hand is gone. It's never coming back. Like, just say bye to that hand. That's the thing that Izuku was training towards during this time. And that's exactly what would happen. Izuku, using his quirk, would fly through the surrounding area as he would destroy clone after clone after clone, rushing through a bunch of robots as he would pretty much grab one and crush its head into a size of a ball. As he, using that ball, he would throw it right into the chest of one of the ectoplasms, forming a hole into it as it would fall down onto the ground, turning into sludge. Izuku shooting off towards multiple, as he would begin doing a Vegeta style ki blast barrage at just a bunch of robots and ectoplasms until eventually nothing would be left. It'd be at this point that Aizawa would be extremely stunned, because not only did he actually try to erase the kid's quirk to no avail, but this kid's abilities don't even seem to be a quirk. There's something completely out of whack. This goes against all nature that they currently have, like their whole like thoughts about how quirks work. He might be the first evolution of quirks that like is just different, you know? And that's just what they're thinking about. But honestly, this isn't exactly a quirk. This dude is straight up just the reincarnation of Beerus. But again, nurture over nature, not nature over nurture for this specific video, obviously, right? But anyways, this would eventually accumulate to Izuku himself meeting All Might around the 3rd day of his training. And once he would meet All Might, and once All Might realizes that this is the same kid, he would be just delighted. He'd be like, "Huh, so it's you, young man. I see that you did manage to get to UA. Nice to meet you." From here, Izuku, going to have a handshake with All Might and pretty much say that he's so happy he gets to go one-on-one with the #1 hero, telling All Might to hold back a bit, as All Might would say, "Of course I will," going on to put on these 500-pound weights on both of his arms and legs, as Izuku would say, "I was thinking you were just gonna push yourself back. I don't think you're gonna be needing that." And All Might would say, "Well, just in case, I don't want to hurt you, young man," placing his hand on Izuku's shoulder as he would go on to say that he's ready. as Izuku, after hearing that, would think to himself, alright, but you better make sure you don't pull your punches if I start getting ahead of myself. As All Might from here would get into his stance, and before All Might could even realize it, Izuku would have blitzed from his field of vision, literally leaving an after image, punching All Might in the gut, literally almost ripping through his stomach. From here, All Might would be sent flying through 17 buildings, ultimately crashing onto a wall and just coughing out a bunch of blood. Izuku, after seeing that, would freak out like never before, thinking to himself that he punched him with like 10% of his strength, like he didn't mean to. As All Might is just knocked out, and it's not even All Might anymore, now it's Small Might, right? So Small Might is sitting there, and Izuku's just going, I'm so sorry. Like, Izuku straight up stays at All Might's bedside, refusing to leave, no matter what anyone told him. And like, they even threaten expulsion, or Aizawa at least, and Izuku's like, no, like, I'm gonna stay by All Might's side. So right after All Might wakes up, Izuku just profusely apologizes, telling him that he is so unbelievably sorry, that this never should have happened, as All Might goes on to explain that he had no idea that there was somebody out there who was this much stronger than him. And Izuku would say that he didn't mean to, he really was holding back. All Might, hearing that, would think to himself that if this kid was holding back, he could probably blow up the planet with a punch. And Izuku would say he probably could. In fact, one time they went to the Grand Canyon, his mother and himself, for a little trip, and Izuku accidentally ended up making the Grand Canyon a lot deeper than it was originally. As All Might would say, that was you? And Izuku says, yeah, Mom didn't exactly want us to go on the news to talk about that. And All Might would just be like, well, kid, you have quite a future out ahead of yourself. How would you like to inherit my quirk? All Might would say to Izuku, as, you know, Recovery Girl would be in the room. And Izuku says, what are you talking about, All Might? Quirks can't be passed on, right? All Might would look at him and say, well, not normal quirks, but mine can. As Izuku, upon hearing this, would think to himself that it'd probably be great, but if he needs a successor, he actually might know somebody who would be even better than he is. Somebody who's probably going to be a better hero than he's going to be. I mean, at least have more of a swagger than he does, right? As from here, All Might would say, who are you referring to? And Izuku would pretty much say that the student he's talking about is Katsuki Bakugo. He's also going to be enrolling in UA, and he's his best friend. He's been training with him ever since he can remember, and if he was to inherit the quirk, he'd probably be the #1 hero in about a week. As All Might, hearing that and reviewing the tape of what Bakugo could actually do against the robots, he would actually decide that that's a great idea. This dude, Bakugo, straight up destroyed 120 robots, and his 0-pointer for his specific section was also blown to smithereens by Bakugo. So All Might just thinks to himself, I mean, 2 insanely overpowered students, why the heck not, you know? So that's exactly what happens. Bakugo this time ends up being the inheritor of One for All, and Izuku, well, he's just fine with that. But after all of this stuff would happen, as you guys could guess, a little bit more training would take place, with All Might pretty much supervising Izuku and all the heroes realizing that they're not exactly going to be a threat to him. They would kind of just train Izuku as best as they can, eventually focusing more on rescue training and like general like hero patrolling and stuff like that, to which Izuku would actually go on to meet Endeavor, who would help him with that, since All Might is kind of out of commission right now. But after all that would be said and done, the first day of UA High would finally come around, and because it's been long enough, Bakugo has had some time to train alongside Izuku, you know, after he would train with the heroes at Dagoma Beach, as he would have been training with All Might mainly, right? And so when the first day of school finally comes around, Bakugo and Izuku would be dropped off at the front gate, as Izuku would be eating a McGriddle, Bakugo would be having like a hash brown in his hand, and they walk inside with Bakugo saying that food could have been a little fresher. With Izuku just being like, yeah, you're right about that, but it always hits the spot. As Bakugo says, yeah, it always hits the spot of making me feel like I'm gonna die. That food's terrible, but I needed something in my system. As from here, Izuku would say, whatever, we're gonna have professional lunches here, Bakugo. Aren't you excited? Bakugo would say, I'm excited to become a #1 hero and prove that I don't have to be stronger than you to take that spot. As Izuku would laugh and say, I'm sure you will, Bakugo. As right after that would happen, they make their way into the classroom and sit towards the front, since, you know, Aizawa wants both of them to be on their best behavior. But ultimately, a blue-haired boy would walk into the classroom and start berating Bakugo, being like, hey, you can't have your feet on the table. This is disrespectful. This goes against everything. This is UA property. You can't, like, just going crazy, right? And Bakugo just looks at him and goes, huh? why do you have such a big stick up here? As Ida would say, why I never. And Bakugo would say that he's gonna enjoy bringing him down a couple pegs, rich kid. As Ida would be like, how dare you? But ultimately, Izuku getting in the middle would smile at Ida and say that he's sorry about that. Looking at Bakugo as he'd be like, whatever. Putting his feet down at the table as Izuku would say, dude, I literally put my neck out there for you, telling All Might that you'd be a good successor. Start acting like a hero. As Bakugo would say, shut up. It's not my fault all these extras around me aren't acting like I am. I'm just different. What of it? As Izuku would just look at Bakugo and be like, dude, chill out. Aizawa's right there. And Bakugo would just look at him and be like, fine. They would finally stay quiet until eventually Uraraka would walk into the classroom, thanking Izuku profusely for the fact that he saved her life during the entrance exams, and Izuku would say that it was really no problem at all. That robot was pretty weak, as Uraraka would just smile and be like, yeah, weak, right. But Mineta would have actually overheard this as well and been like, what do you mean the zero pointer was weak? I heard there was some kid that obliterated it in like 10 seconds. Was that you? And Izuku would look at him and say, yeah, it was me, but it was more like 4 probably. As Mineta hearing that would be like, what a still off. And Kaminari getting close to him would want to befriend him because, you know, being close to the cool kid kind of makes you cool by proxy, you know what I mean? But right after that would happen, Bakugo smacks Izuku on the back and would just be like, hey, get ready, he's about to wake up. As, you know, he would sit back down on the desk. Aizawa would tell everybody to throw these on and meet him outside, and right after this would happen, they would make their way to take the quirk apprehension test, with Bakugo saying to make sure he doesn't look like a loser out there, as they're in the fitting rooms. And Izuku would say he'll try not to, having a way too buff physique for his age, as Kaminari, not Kaminari, but Kirishima, seeing this would just be like, dude, you're manly. And Izuku would thank him for that as they would make their way outside, and he would go on and have the ball thrown at him as Izuku decides, okay, I'll throw it. And he would throw it as far as he possibly can, getting infinity, not because he has an anti-gravity quirk, but because he tossed it into space and it, kind of wasn't coming down. So after that would end up happening, we would end up getting everybody else going, and the 2 most impressive candidates, or 3 technically, would be Uraraka, Izuku, and Katsuki Bakugo, because he would be able to use One for All alongside his already insanely powerful explosion quirk. But now it's kind of like on roids because of the fact that Bakugo has One for All's amp on his quirk already. So Bakugo is very overpowered in this version of events, and I'm not gonna lie, Bakugo can barely control the quirk at this moment because it's a lot. Like, before, his explosions were hard to handle, but now they dang near make his bones creak every time that he uses the quirk, and he knows one thing's for sure: he needs to get stronger and fast, or else he's gonna end up blowing his arm off one of these days. And so after Izuku gets the best scores on some straight up Dragon Ball style, like, do you guys remember the tournament where like Vegeta and all of them went to the punching machine and they just straight up shattered it and they were like, these guys are weaklings? That's what would happen, but with Izuku and Bakugo. Both of them end up getting the top scores of the class, and everybody else just looks at them and they're like, these guys are literally monsters. But after everything would end, Izuku would go over to Aizawa and ask him if he could finally go home today. And Aizawa would say, yeah kid, you deserve it. Izuku would finally end up making his way home, slamming on the bed and just sleeping to the next day. Mind you, he got there at like 4 o'clock, so he slept from 4 to like 8 a.m. the next morning, which means that he's kind of running late. He'd be like 10 minutes late getting into the class, and because of that, Aizawa would give him a death stare. So Izuku would kind of do the walk of shame to his desk as he would finally sit down, kind of holding his hands over his head, with Kaminari being like, don't worry about it, dude. See, we all run late every now and then. Izuku turns back to him and he's just like, yeah, you're right about that. As finally they would have the rest of the school day happen, they eventually have lunch, yada yada yada, and eventually we would find ourselves with the Heroes versus Villains event, and All Might would walk in with the cast in his buff state. Like, his arm has a cast on it, but he's in his buff state, and everybody's like, All Might, what happened? And he's like, I fell down the stairs. And everyone just falls off their desks and they're just like, are you kidding me? But Izuku and All Might are the only, Izuku, All Might, and Bakugo technically are the only ones aware of what the truth is. Izuku straight up obliterated him. And now that Bakugo has this new quirk, he thinks to himself that he could probably hang with Izuku. So he wants to fight him, but Izuku's just like, Bakugo, I don't think you're gonna be strong enough still. So after school, they're gonna fight. But for now, we have 1v1 battles. So All Might would do his regular thing, everybody's fawning over him, and eventually he would tell the class that the clothes make the pros. Following these events, All Might would end up showing everybody to their costumes, and they would all get changed before meeting him outside, where they would all draw ballots to see who they're going to be going up against. Once this would happen, unfortunately for everybody else in the class, Izuku would pair up with Katsuki Bakugo. And their opponents, well, it's Kirishima and Sato, because I was going to go with Mineta and Momo, but I just felt bad doing Momo like that. So Kirishima and Sato. The second that they would hear that, bro, Kirishima would be pumped and Sato would be scared, rightfully so. It's like, dude, you're going against two freaking titans. Like, how are you supposed to feel? You know what I mean? But regardless of the fact, they would end up making their way towards the bomb room because actually no, let's say that Bakugo and Izuku are the heroes, are the villains actually. So Kirishima and Sato make their way into the building, and the second that they do, Kirishima would see that Bakugo just kind of sitting there by the door, and Izuku's right behind him, and they're both in this really cool pose where they both have so much aura coming off of them. Immediately seeing this, Kirishima and Sato would kind of like shiver down their spines, and then Bakugo would like kind of Izuku would whisper to Bakugo, he's like, am I doing it right? And Bakugo's like, shut up, Deku. As you know, both of them realizing that they were kind of like trying their best to look cool would start like be like, okay, you know, we have a chance. So Kirishima would harden himself and rush towards the direction of Izuku. As Izuku realizing that because of his hardening quirk, he could probably punch him a bit harder than usual. So using 1% of his strength, Izuku punches Kirishima to the side of the arm because he would block the blow, but it would still end up shattering his hardening and send him crashing through the wall, knocking him out. As Sato seeing that would immediately chug like 3 cubes of sugar, causing him to get like really buff as he would rush towards Bakugo, but Bakugo in this moment would be like, out of the way, extra, as he shoots an explosion at him, sending him flying down the hallway, with both of them being rushed to Recovery Girl's office, where Izuku and Bakugo would both be like, well, Izuku would apologize for the both of them, and Bakugo would be like, dang it, Izuku, you always have to be such a loser. As from here, Izuku's like, dude, it's the right thing to do, we just hurt those guys. And everybody watching this would just be like, okay, we are so glad that these guys are not villains, because if they were, we'd all probably be dead. But anyways, right after that would take place, we would finally end up having everybody else do their own thing, and we would then cover the next events with Izuku and Bakugo staying after school, as the both of them would actually be going under training by All Might, or more specifically, a one-on-one battle, in which Izuku would stare down Bakugo, kind of looking at him like feeling bad, not having like a game face on, and Bakugo would say, dang it, Izuku, how many times do I have to tell you to look imposing, look threatening, do something, damn it, Deku. As Izuku hearing this would be like, alright, fine, and he would look at Bakugo with like a death stare. Suddenly all the aura in the room would change as purple-like energy would start shooting off of Izuku, and Izuku instantly blitzes behind Bakugo throwing an explosion as he appears in front of him and says, too slow. He would try to attack him again and again and again and again until finally Izuku would grab onto Bakugo's gauntlets, since he would try to throw an explosion at him, crush them, as Bakugo holding both of his hands out in front of him would shoot a point-blank explosion, the strongest, which causes his bones to creak and kind of like injure himself a bit. But Izuku would just stand there, tanking the explosion, as he would tell Bakugo if this is serious enough, as he would go on to grab Bakugo by the shoulder and slightly squeeze it, causing Bakugo to fall down onto both knees, as he's like, dang it, Izuku, stop, as he's like, damn it. And Izuku would finally calm down, going back into his normal state, with All Might being like, what was that, Izuku? And Izuku would say that Bakugo asked him to get serious, so he got serious. Izuku tells him that he was kind of pretending that Bakugo had killed his mom or something to get himself to get hyped up and to like really take this as serious as he could. And All Might hearing that would be like, dude, that's insane. Who does that? You know what I mean? But after hearing that, Bakugo would start laughing, pat Izuku on the back and tell him that that's exactly the kind of aura he has to give off. As following this, we would have the events of the USJ, so everybody gets permission slips, just like it used to happen when we would go to school. They go home, they get them signed by their guardians and stuff like that. And finally, we would find ourselves with all the students on the USJ, on the, well, not the USJ bus, but the UA bus, right? As they would make their way straight there, and eventually we would have Pro Hero 13 make an acquaintance with the students. She would go on to explain to everybody what the rules are, and right after this would take place, we would see purple mist appear in the center of everything. As this would happen, and Kirishima would say, "Wow, fake villains!" After Aizawa would say, "These aren't fake villains," and Izuku could sense the seriousness of the situation. Taking into account all the training that he's had taken place with Endeavor, Izuku would shoot a blast of Hakai energy straight towards the direction of Shigaraki, as like Izuku would see that all the energy went through him and that it didn't actually touch Kurogiri, right? But seeing that Izuku was extremely dangerous, Kurogiri would teleport him out of there straight toward another section, the section with the boats. But Izuku, instead of falling into the water, would just kind of float and fly above it all, as he would stare down Kurogiri, who had just teleported him away, flying back in front of him, as he would grab onto the metal thing that Kurogiri has, spinning it in mid-air before slamming him into the ground, causing Kurogiri to be completely taken out of the battle, meaning that he won't be able to like summon or to teleport all the other students away, right? So right after this would happen, Izuku would proceed to look around, analyzing the situation, as he could see exactly where the boss was, and tell Aizawa to keep the students safe, as he would fly towards the direction of Shigaraki and the Nomu, and Shigaraki would say, "Dang it, we didn't know there would be somebody like you here." As Izuku would say, "Guess what? The world didn't either, but now I'm here." As you know, it sounded cringy because it was supposed to sound cringy. Like Izuku was still learning how to be cool and imposing and like give off really cool one-liners. That's why it's supposed to be like kind of corny. But Shigaraki hearing that would be like, as you know, he kind of just looks at Izuku, and then the Nomu would punch Izuku square in the jaw, being like, "Did you feel that? He has the power of All Might." As Izuku says, "What exactly is this?" And Shigaraki goes on to explain that that's a Nomu. It's a creature that he created. And Izuku would go on to say, "So it's not a human being, right?" As Shigaraki would say, "It was." And after hearing this, Izuku would get angry at the fact that that thing used to be a human, but clearly it isn't anymore. So Izuku would say, "I'm sorry, but I'll grant you mercy." As he would shoot an energy beam, not a Hakai beam, straight at the direction of this Nomu, obliterating it, just destroying the Nomu out of existence. As Shigaraki seeing this would be like, "But that was our most powerful," before Izuku, you know, stands before Shigaraki and just kind of like slaps him. He straight up slaps him into the ground, causing Shigaraki to slide throughout the dirt. And Izuku would give a death stare to the remaining villains, who all literally just like, they deactivate their quirks and say, "We yield." As Izuku standing in the middle of all of this, Aizawa would crack a smile, thinking to himself that that kid really did learn everything he taught him. Take care of the situation quick. Make sure that you don't waste time. Don't play games. These are villains, not people with sad backstories. They've made their choices, and now they have to face the consequences. And as I would be extremely proud of Izuku, genuinely, as after this would happen, Izuku would pretty much be praised by Nezu for handling the situation so well, and Bakugo would just kind of be sitting up there being like, "Huh, guess I got some catching up to do. Not like I couldn't have taken out that freak, but I figured I'd let you have this one, especially since my arms are kind of out of commission for a bit, since you kind of destroyed them a bit." And Izuku would be like, what do you mean I destroyed them? You shot a full power explosion in my face. Had it been anybody else, you might have straight up killed them. And Bakugo's like, yeah, but it was you, so you'll be fine. As Izuku would say, yeah, whatever. Well, you guys better tune in for part 3. Once again, picking off where we left off, we're now going to get into the next arc of the series, which is obviously, you know, the UA Sports Festival. Oh, and by the way, I do have a question for you guys before I actually begin with everything. Do you guys enjoy when there's no intros to these videos, like the parts at least, and then I just get into it, like without wasting your guys' time? If so, then let me know down below in the comments so I can hopefully keep doing this. But if not, then, you know, I'll add a little 10-second intro, I guess. Why not? But yeah, whatever. Anyways, jumping into the story, we now fast forward to the students back in the classroom. And after all the events that took place in the USJ, one thing is actually a lot different than in the original story. Number one, some rumors did begin to spread about one boy being responsible for the actual help in defeating the villains at the USJ. Because it's kind of common knowledge that the USJ was infiltrated by villains, but one thing that isn't as common common knowledge is the fact that one student very much so helped in taking them all down. And this is a widespread rumor that a lot of people have been wondering about. And some people in, UA don't really know how to keep their mouths shut. I'm looking at you, Mineta. So this rumor ends up spreading massively throughout UA. So just like in the original, where the rest of the classes, like the general studies and people like Shinso and Class 1B, when they all went to look at the competition and scope them out in their own classroom, after class was over and stuff like that, we would get a situation in which all of them are pretty much not letting them all get out of their, get out of the room. And Izuku would make his way to the door wondering what the heck all this commotion's about. Once he would get up there to the front, he would see all of these people there, and then all of them would be like, that's him, he's the boy with the green hair. As Izuku's looking at them, he'd say, hey, what are you guys doing here? Like being super nice, super kind. And then finally, like after he'd be nice, and they're like, oh, he's a nice guy. Like, what are we worried about, Suddenly Bakugo comes to the door and he's like, huh, what are all these extras doing here? As he sees how Izuku's handling the situation, smacking him in the head, going, Deku, how many times do I have to tell you to stop acting like a loser? As from here, Izuku would be like, come on, Bakugo, I'm just being nice. And Bakugo says, just follow me. As he would stay quiet, walking past them, brushing by them, and Izuku would do the same. Like, as suddenly, like, his whole vibe would change, and you would just feel an energy of, like, power coming off of him. He would walk by them and then they'd all be like, was he acting just now? Is this the real him or is this the fake him? They're all having these conversations, and suddenly Shinso from the crowd would say, it must be nice to have such a powerful quirk, but let's see that quirk save you from me when we get to the UA Sports Festival. As hearing that, Deku just continues walking away, being like, thinking about what he said, being like, what kind of quirk could he possibly have that would actually pose a threat to me? I mean, genuinely, Izuku up to this point has never had a single situation in which he felt like he could possibly lose. So he's not worried at all, but he is thinking about why he said that though. Regardless of this though, we would eventually fast forward to all of the students being present at the UA Sports Festival, and this is where things slightly change, because we all know that Deku was the one that got the highest points in the the UA entrance exam, so he's actually going to be the one to give the speech, meaning unfortunately we don't get the I'm gonna win speech from Bakugo, and instead we get a very, very cool, lighthearted, and very like badass speech from Deku, which Bakugo helped him actually write. And Izuku at first would have been like reading it from a paper, being kind of nervous, until he finally heard the words of Bakugo through his head, being like, stop being such a loser, which ultimately gave Izuku the confidence to carry himself in the way that Bakugo probably would have liked. So because of this, Izuku was finally able to give a solid speech, and the crowd went nuts. Following this, obviously we have the race event, and normally I'd be like, all right, so here's how this goes down and this, but bro, let's be honest, this dude has the speed of a Dragon Ball Z character. These dudes were literally able to fly across the planet in like 20 seconds from the Buu saga. So there's no doubt in my mind that Izuku's gonna speed blitz so unbelievably fast that there's literally an after image that's just standing still at the starting line. The second that the starter's pistol's blown, Izuku would just look like he's just standing still. But if you looked at the cameras, which didn't actually register him passing, you would notice that Izuku literally got there within a blink of an eye, and his after image was still there. So everybody would be stunned as Midnight would say, well, would you look at that? Looks like we have our winner. Seems to me like somebody here has a teleportation quirk. As she would look towards Izuku and wink, Izuku getting bright red in the face as everybody else eventually ends up passing, and finally we would move on to the cavalry battle section. Now once we get to this part of the test, this is where things get a bit interesting, because in most of my what ifs, I never pair Bakugo and Deku together, but in this specific time, Bakugo definitely would be paired up with Izuku because he got second place, which would honestly scare most of everybody else, because not only did this kid straight up blitz to the finish line before they could even perceive it, but then the second place dude got there in like 2 seconds. So that was just insane, and he did that using One for All in tandem with his explosion quirk, right? And this would pretty much lead to Bakugo looking towards Deku and being like, hey, I'm gonna be working with you in this event. Don't get too cocky though. I'm only doing this to make sure you don't make me look bad. Cause if worse comes to worse and they make us fight each other, then I'm probably gonna lose, and I gotta make sure that my image is upheld. So don't carry yourself as a loser. Got that, Deku? As Izuku hearing this would be like, fine, fine. And Bakugo would say, you better, because I won't have it if my debut gets ruined by some loser. As Izuku would be like, shut up, Bakugo. And then Bakugo would be like, that's exactly the kind of bravado we need from you right now. You better go out there and make us proud. As you know, what would pretty much take place is Bakugo and Izuku would have 2 random students from UA join them. I mean, Mei Hatsume is most likely going to be joining them, as well as Uraraka, just because, you know, she's grateful to him, and she kind of sees the fact that if she joins that team, she'll probably end up doing very well. So that would be the team that ends up being assembled, and because Bakugo and Deku are both on the same team, no one's going to get close to them. Plus, even if they try, dude, it's just not going to end well for them. Bakugo has the ability to pretty much fly, so he can just jump off of the carriage, which is, you know, all 3 of their bodies who are carrying him, and he can just like blitz towards you, blast an explosion in your face, and rip your headband off all at the same time. Like, it's just not a good idea. So it honestly would get kind of boring until eventually Bakugo would say, dang it, no one's coming towards us. As he would say, guess we gotta go to them. And he would make his way towards a couple of other teams, just absolutely destroying their hopes and dreams to advance for the next event of the festival, until finally the event would finally be over, and we would then move on to the 1v1 battles. Now, just like in the original, Izuku would still be matched up against Shinso, and this is going to be extremely bad for him, because although Izuku is extremely superior to all of his other opponents in terms of physical strength and speed and just everything, dude, he hasn't exactly trained his mind. Plus, I don't really know how to counter Shinso's like talking thing. And with the way that Izuku kind of carries himself whenever he's not thinking of what Bakugo has to say, he's gonna say something to Shinso, especially if Shinso starts talking trash to him and Izuku has Bakugo's influence in his mind. Yeah, he's gonna say something. Plus, if he doesn't, Izuku is just the kind of person to be like, what would make you say that? You know what I mean? Like, that's just how Izuku is in this event. So Izuku would pretty much stand face to face against Shinso, and the first thing that comes out of Shinso's mouth would basically be telling him that it must be nice to have been born with such an amazing quirk. It must have been good to be da 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 da, and just start spouting a bunch of insults at Deku. This would cause Deku to pretty much like say something to Shinso. It doesn't really matter what he says, honestly, because he says something, right? Like he gets trapped in Shinso's quirk. And because in this event, Izuku doesn't exactly have one for all, Izuku has absolutely no way of snapping out of it. Or does he? Because as Izuku's making his way towards the edge of the arena, and he's walking off, and everybody's like, hey kid, what are you doing? Why are you walking off? Izuku, right as he's about to step off, he would hear a voice telling him to get his head in the game. As Izuku, hearing that, would be too late. His body wouldn't be able to do anything, but he knows that he heard some voice. It's not his own. It was something else, and he's not really sure what that was, but he lost, and now he knows he's going to get an earful from Bakugo. And so that's exactly what would happen. Following these events, Izuku would pretty much get filleted by Bakugo, who would tell him that he's a loser. How could he like let his guard down? And then Izuku would go on to explain that that kid's quirk pretty much made him not be able to do anything, because if he talked to him, he lost. And unfortunately for Shinso, this is where everything would stop, because we know how Icy Hawk gets down. Todoroki's not going to be saying anything to him. He's just going to straight up freeze him if he makes him mad. Like, why does he have to say anything if he can just one-shot KO him, you know? So that's exactly what Todoroki does. And we would eventually get a 1v1 battle between Katsuki and Todoroki, which would not end up very well at all for either of them. Well, very well for Bakugo, because in this timeline, when Todoroki shoots a gigantic geyser of ice, Bakugo using one hand would blow it up, as with the other he would turn it behind him and shoot himself straight in front of Todoroki. As in one fell swoop, Bakugo grabs onto the throat of Todoroki and blasts him into the outskirts of the wall, smashing him into it, as he would backflip with his explosions mid-air and then aim one giant explosion, shooting it squarely at the body of Todoroki, which causes Todoroki to straight up fall onto the grass, completely unconscious. That final battle literally lasted like 1 second. And it's kind of ironic, because all of the other battles that Todoroki had at that point were pretty much washes. It's kind of funny to see that somebody who was thinking he was all that then ended up getting kind of washed by somebody else. You know, it's kind of that Dragon Ball mentality of like there's always a bigger fish out there, and you know, he unfortunately had to learn that the hard way. So moving on, we would eventually have some time with Izuku by himself, where he would start thinking to himself that yeah, he's stronger than everybody else and he has all of these incredible gifts, but he would think to himself one thing: what would ever happen if there was a villain that could control his mind? A villain that could take over his body? Something along those lines. He would remember the prospect of a villain taking over his body because of the sludge villain and what had happened on that day, with him telling him that he needs his body and that he's going to be a real hero to him. And then he would also remember what just happened to him with Shinso, realizing that if that was to ever happen, nobody in this world would possibly be able to stop him. So Izuku, realizing this, would start to think that he needs to be in control of his mind. That's the one thing that he needs. And as he would think that, he would hear a voice like slightly like quiet in the back of his mind telling him he does need to focus on that. But Izuku kind of just ignores it, not exactly knowing what that is. But as you guys can most likely tell at this point already, it's pretty much Beerus, because Izuku is the reincarnation of Beerus, right? So what would pretty much end up taking place after this is that we would finally find ourselves back in the classroom after the UA festival would be done. Izuku would be in class along with his, everybody else, and they would finally go on and pick hero names. It'd be in this moment that Izuku would hear the name Beerus in his mind, and so thinking about that, he thinks that's a pretty cool hero name. So he chooses the name Beerus the Destroyer as his hero name, and so once that would all be said and done, Izuku would make his way towards Nezu's office, where Nezu would be like, "Ah, Izuku, I'm so glad to see you here. Who did you end up choosing for your internship?" And Izuku, turning towards Nezu, would say, "I wanted to talk to you about that. I don't think I want to choose anybody for my internship. Would it be okay if I just stayed here and worked on meditation and controlling my mind? I want to make sure that no villain will ever be able to infiltrate my mind and take over me. Because if that happens, then, how's anyone going to stop me?" Nezu, hearing that, would think to himself that is extremely smart. Plus, he can let it slide considering the fact that Izuku practically trains with pro heroes every day. So he doesn't really need some hero internship. He practically has been getting that from the moment he took the entrance exam. And so instead of doing the usual thing and going along with Gran Torino, because in this timeline Bakugo's the one that does that, meaning Bakugo's going to be the one who's responsible for saving Ida, not really wanting to, but just kind of doing it because he could, you know what I mean? Bakugo also would definitely enjoy taking the credit for defeating Stain, so I can see him pretty much like taking the credit 100%. Like, he's not letting Endeavor take the credit for that. Bakugo is trying to make his debut, So with that, Bakugo would now go down in the books as the kid who not only won the UA Sports Festival, but also took down the hero killer Stain. And all over the news, it would begin saying that these new hero prospects are absolutely insane. Like, people start talking about Izuku and Bakugo and even Todoroki, even though he lost, right? Everyone's just going crazy. They're like, dude, these new heroes are just built different, right? And as that would be happening, like I said, Deku would be meditating. The entire first 2 days, Deku just meditating, until finally one day, as Deku has his eyes closed and he's thinking about all the events that have transpired up to this point, he would finally see himself in a white area. Everything is just white. He literally can see nothing, until suddenly he can hear the footsteps of somebody and like a groggling voice that just woke up, as it would say, "Who are you, kid?" And Izuku would be like, "Who are you?" As Beerus would say, "Well, I'm Beerus the Destroyer, and you're Izuku Midoriya. Can't believe that I reincarnated as you." As Izuku, hearing that, would be like, You're Beerus the Destroyer? What's that?" From here, Beerus would go on to explain that he's a god, as Izuku would be like, a god? What are you talking about?" And Beerus would go on to explain that a long time ago, in this very universe, he was the god of destruction for Universe 7. Izuku, hearing that, would be like, "Universe 7? What are you talking about? There's multiple universes?" As Beerus would go on to explain that there is multiple universes, and he'll get to that if he would just shut up. As from here, Izuku would be like, all right, I'm sorry." And from here, Beerus would just walk around Izuku, like hitting him in his arm, checking his muscular structure, seeing his height and seeing how Izuku's built, and he'd be like, "Wow, I guess you have potential, but you're pretty weak." As Izuku would be like, "Weak? Me?" and Beerus in an instant would stand before Izuku, grabbing him by the neck. Izuku couldn't even register what was going on, and Beerus would pretty much hold him up, saying, "Like I said, weak," as his energy starts sparking up. But ultimately, Beerus would go on to say that it's okay, because before creation must come destruction, which would lead Beerus to pretty much begin to explain to Izuku that while he's probably far more powerful than anybody on this world and any world, considering Frieza, Goku, Vegeta, and all of them died a long time ago when Earth was destroyed by a malevolent being in the universe that was allowed to escape, with Beerus kind of alluding to something but not exactly saying what it is, right? And so we would finally get to a point where Izuku wonders what in the heck he's talking about, with Beerus pretty much explaining that this Earth is not even the original Earth, that this Earth was made by a wish by Krillin a long time ago so that most of human civilization could come here and forget all the Zero Warriors, forget the Dragon Balls. But Izuku needs to train if he's gonna have any hope of defeating this thing, because he promises it will come. And he even defeated himself. So not only is Izuku now gonna have to get stronger than Beerus, which is gonna make literal life unfun for him, because like no villain is gonna be able to even pose him like even the slightest threat. But now Izuku's gonna have to train like his life depends on it, literally. So for the next couple of like minutes, Beerus would pretty much just brief him out on why he's even reincarnated in the first place, stating that Goku wished that Beerus was reincarnated when they were fighting their final battle. It was him, Goku, and Vegeta against this thing, but all three of them together couldn't even defeat it. Beerus would go on to explain that the only reason they lost is because he couldn't control Ultra Instinct. He was lazy, he didn't train, he thought that he was stronger than everybody else, but he's not going to make that same mistake, not with him. As Izuku hearing this would be like, so how are you gonna train me? Aren't you just a figure of my imagination? And Beerus would go on to say, there's nothing imaginary about this, boy. You're gonna do mental training, which is gonna translate to the outside world. And after this, you're gonna go out to an open wasteland. You're gonna begin training all of these abilities. So get ready, because you're in for hell on Earth. As for the following next week, Beerus would beat some knowledge into this man, teaching him and refining his fighting style, showing him the destruction style, fighting style, and Izuku would eventually end up leveling up by so many tiers. Like, now it would get to the point where Izuku, after training for just a week, would get to that level of Beerus in the God of Destruction movie. You know, like that level where like he's like really OP. Or no, not even then, but like Tournament of Destroyer Beerus, like he has like that level of finesse, right? So now he's very powerful, right? And Izuku is now feeling himself. He thinks that he could fight whoever, that no one's gonna stand up to him. But what's kind of embarrassing is that Beerus and his mindscape just completely destroys him every single time. Like, not only is Izuku training in the outside world and in his mind at night while he's literally sleeping, but Izuku is getting his butt beat by Beerus every single time. And one thing that Beerus would tell him is that at this current moment, Whis, his angel attendant, is in a stasis-like state, not being able to do anything because the next god of destruction was never appointed. So their universe is kind of in a state where if they don't have another one appointed, you know, they're kind of cooked. So Izuku, after hearing that, would think to himself that he has to become this destroyer creature, and Beerus would go on to explain that that's exactly what he needs to do. So Izuku, after hearing that, would think to himself that he needs to get stronger to defeat this thing, and then after that he has to become some destroyer. He would go on to explain that he just wanted to become a hero. He doesn't want that kind of responsibility. But Beerus would go on to pretty much explain to him that he didn't want to be a destroyer either. But look at how that cookie crumbled. As from here, Beerus would pretty much go on to state that he's going to go back to sleep. As Izuku would say, are you kidding me? You literally said that you died because you slept so much, and now you're going to do that again? Beerus would look at him like angrily and say, shut up, kid. As, you know, Izuku would just be like, well, regardless, thank you for the help, as Beerus would tell Izuku to continue his training, and next time to go to another planet so that he's able to practice his destruction abilities, telling Izuku that there's multiple planets in the universe that haven't been destroyed by this specific creature just because there's no life on there, so there's nothing for him to gain. So Izuku could practice using different, more destructive techniques on those planets. So Izuku would take that to heart, And after the internship period would finally be over, Izuku would go back to class where there would just be a different aura around him. Izuku would learn to become more hardened, become more serious, and understand that he's not training right now to just be a hero. He's training for something greater than that, the salvation of the universe itself. And so, as everybody would walk into class, Bakugo could just sense that Izuku got so much stronger. There's just a presence in that room of overwhelming, it's to the point where Mineta literally had to go outside just to catch his breath because the air was so thick in that area that he just straight up couldn't breathe. And so Aizawa would finally make his way into the class and just to kind of tell Izuku to lower the aura. As from here, Izuku would do so, apologizing for that, and he would take his power all the way down. Bakugo, after seeing that, would go over to Izuku and ask him what the heck happened to him, as Izuku would just go on to explain that a lot of things happened during this last 2 weeks, saying that he met his predecessor, as Bakugo would be like, predecessor? What are you talking about? After this, we would have a couple of scenes going on throughout the day of UA High where as they're doing their homework, Bakugo would just kind of be like nudging Deku, being like, Deku, hey, what did you mean about predecessor? And Izuku would turn towards the direction of Bakugo and tell him that he'll tell him after school, but Bakugo, being the kind of person that he is, would be really insistent on it, and eventually would lead to Deku giving him small tidbits of information throughout the entire day of school, which lead to them eventually both walking home, making their way towards the train station. As they would be there, Bakugo would finally begin to have a full grasp on the situation, realizing that that's why Deku's so strong. His power doesn't derive from a quirk, it derived instead from a literal deity in their universe. So Bakugo kind of realized, like, okay, I've been competing with the literal reincarnation of Kami this entire time. Like, what am I up to, you know? So because of that, he would finally realize, like, okay, he's never gonna actually end up beating Deku. But this would lead Bakugo to have a bunch of questions and ultimately sigh, saying, you know what? I'm glad that this means that you're like this super powerful, omnipotent being, because it just shows me that even if I fail at my mission, we'll still have you around to take care of All for One. As, you know, Bakugo realized he probably shouldn't have said that, but he doesn't care. Izuku would be like, who's All for One? And from here, Bakugo goes on to explain the entire history, the plot, like the whole entire like backstory of All for One and how One for All came to being a quirk and all that stuff. So after Deku hears that, he'd be like, dude, your quirk is insane. Not only do you now have an explosion quirk, but now you have this super crazy powerful quirk that derived from like all these crazy challenges and people and handing it down. Deku tells Bakugo that he's so lucky, as Bakugo's like, I'm lucky, but you're the reincarnation of Kami himself. He would just go on to basically sigh and be like, whatever. Anyways, Deku, with me around and you around, this world won't be facing any problems. As Deku would, you know, think about it before telling Bakugo, but ultimately not say it. I mean, at the end of the day, that battle was Bakugo's battle, and, you know, he promised that he wasn't going to get involved with the All for One situation. He knows that Bakugo's going to be able to handle that. So, Deku should be able to handle his own situation without bothering him or the rest of the planet. Just because he knows that there's a being out there who is so much stronger than Beerus himself was in his heyday, and he has to literally defeat somebody stronger than that who's out there in the universe, getting closer and closer as the years pass, destroying planets. Deku doesn't exactly want to put that kind of like thing on Bakugo, knowing that he won't even be able to do a thing if this like potential being even comes here, because at this moment, Bakugo wouldn't be capable of landing a single punch on him. Like, anything at all, like let alone an explosion from long range. There's nothing that could hit Deku or harm him in this universe of My Hero Academia, at least on this planet. But this would pretty much end up leading him to making his way home, as he would kick his legs up onto the air and think to himself about how he's exactly going to get strong enough to defeat this thing. Throwing a little tennis ball into the air, eventually catching it and just destroying it in his hands, as it would turn into nothing but dust before the dust itself literally vanishes into nothingness. And then Deku would just sit there as he would get up off his desk, doing like a front flip, like like a back flip, as he floats mid-air and begins to think to himself like, how am I going to defeat this thing? And suddenly Beerus tells him he needs to train, what he's been telling him this entire time. As Deku's like, what the? Since when are you able to speak to me when I'm wide awake? And Beerus is like, well, our connection is becoming a lot stronger. Eventually, some of my memories are going to start to pass on to you. And at that very moment, Deku would proceed to fall onto his knees onto the ground as a bunch of memories start flowing through his head. He remembers Champa, he remembers Goku, Vegeta, Broly, Moro, Granola, Black Frieza, which was one of the most powerful threats they've ever faced, and this dude is even more powerful than that. In fact, it's a Saiyan, and it's one that was never accounted for. But that's regardless, I mean, that's besides the point. For right now, Izuku would be thinking about this, and he would have like a blurry image of who was the one that actually ended up being the one that put Beerus down. Upon realizing like that he can't exactly remember perfectly who it was, and that Beerus can't remember perfectly because he didn't get a full glimpse of it, because he straight up just died basically instantly, Izuku would just think to himself like he has to fight that, with Beerus explaining not to worry, that he wasn't at his full power state. Beerus going on to say that he's willing to wager that if he was, that thing never would have been able to get a sucker punch on him and kill him. But he let his guard down, which is why he's not going to do the same. So as everybody else would return to school and the next couple of days would just be normal school studies, we would eventually be like shown to all of the students that what's going to happen next is the final exams. So we would have the test portion, which obviously none of you guys are here to listen to, followed by the physical portion where each of them have to face off against the teachers. Now, it would be in this specific area that Bakugo would actually go toe to toe with All Might, and the shocking thing would be that Bakugo would actually end up defeating All Might. Not like in a crazy way where All Might's like all crazy injured, but like he just showed that he was superior to All Might. He was faster than All Might. He wasn't stronger than All Might, but his combat style was well more than enough to handle somebody like All Might, a being as powerful as that. So what would pretty much end up taking place is that after everybody else would end up having their own battles against the teachers, Izuku would be the only one left. In fact, he's the only one without a teammate. This would lead to Principal Nezu telling Izuku that for his final exams, in order to make it even a bit challenging, he's going to be fighting every single teacher at UA. And he would also include a couple of other heroes, like Gang Orca, like Endeavor, Mirko would show up, Best Genius would be there. Principal Nezu would be using like a robot and like telling all the people how to fight Izuku to have the best odds of slowing him down and defeating him. And Izuku would just be standing there looking at that being like, wow, guess I got my work cut out for me. As he would smirk, and the second that Principal Nezu would say to begin, Izuku would instantly blitz towards the direction of Midnight, slamming his elbow into her stomach, not hard enough to like do crazy damage, but just enough to knock her out and send her flying into Gang Orca, who catches her, putting her on the ground before then shooting a full like sonic attack towards the direction of Izuku, which he proceeds to just straight up walk through, as flames would be shot at him from another direction courtesy of Endeavor, followed by a wind gust punch by All Might, who would also be present. This would lead to Izuku walking past both of those attacks, as Mirko would come rushing in and throw a kick at the direction of Izuku, with Izuku catching it and him just slamming her onto the ground, knocking her completely unconscious. Following this up by flying towards the direction of Gang Orca, who was the first one to actually attack him, and shutting his mouth with one hand before then pretty much blasting a weak ki energy blast into his mouth, causing like a mini explosion to go in his body that won't like kill him, but it hurt him, knocking him out completely, and then turning his gaze right at the direction of Endeavor, as he would have like a little bit of an evil smile as he would fly towards his direction, grabbing Endeavor and All Might both by the hero like costumes that they have, and flying them into the air, spinning like a torpedo, leading them both to get out into the stratosphere, where they both like pretty much ran out of oxygen, and then like flying them back down onto the ground, like slamming onto the ground superhero style, gripping them both by both arms. As he would then turn towards like the pro hero who can create a bunch of clones, and he would just shoot a bunch of energy blasts, like little like death beams at the direction of each and every single one of them, before then flying into the air and creating the biggest energy ball that was like created by Frieza, like, you know, when this like little ball turned into like a massive thing, and he then like aimed it towards them. It would be at that exact moment that Principal Nezu would say, and the test can conclude. Izuku Midoriya, we're very proud proud of how this all went down, as the blast would dissipate in Izuku's hand, and he would go on to explain that that was fun, with the pro heroes that were taken out by him just like looking at him and being like, that's not okay. Like, in no universe should a kid be so strong that he can handle this many pro heroes. They would all literally be thanking their lucky stars for the fact that this kid is not a villain, because if he was, like everybody else has kind of come to realize that has ever been in contact with Izuku and seen him fight, there's nobody that's going to be stopping him. And after that would pretty much take place, Izuku would make his way back towards the room where all the students were like watching him fight, and they're all just like dumbfounded. They're like, dude, what's the point of us becoming pro heroes if you can handle everything by yourself? You just took out like top 10 pro heroes all by yourself, and the symbol of peace like it was nothing. As Izuku would say, I've had a lot of training recently, rubbing the back of his head as his classmates would go on to tell him that he's like the best, he's the coolest, that he's gonna be the #1 hero for sure. Bro, a couple of them would even ask to be his sidekicks, not even full-fledged heroes, but just his sidekicks. Like, that mean the world to them. And Izuku would go on to explain that he's not sure if he's actually gonna be able to even become a full-fledged hero at this point. As, you know, letting that out, his classmates would be like, what are you talking about? And Deku would be like, oh, nothing, sorry, I didn't mean that. As, you know, some of them would like look at him and be like, so then what is he gonna be? And then Deku would say, no, I'm gonna be a hero, I didn't mean it like that, sorry, I misworded things. They all finally calmed down, because some of them were under the impression he meant he was gonna like turn into a villain or something, right? And so after this would finally be cleared up, all of them would just relax, as over the course of the next following days, we would be told about the forest training camp. The students end up going to the mall, where they end up originally being encountered by Shigaraki, but because in this timeline, Shigaraki's not nearly dumb enough to do something like that, this would lead, wait, did Shigaraki get captured or no? Because I'm pretty sure Shigaraki got teleported away, and if that's not the case and I didn't have that happen, Shigaraki gets teleported away just to make everything a lot easier. But yeah, no. Continuing forward with the story, we would eventually have the training camp situation happen. Now, once they make their way to the training camp, meaning like they get off of the bus and they complete the monster section where they have to like just like completely go through a gigantic forest in order to make their way towards their rendezvous, because of that like stuff happening and Izuku noticing that every single one of his classmates is getting like great training in except for him, Izuku would just end up texting Nezu asking him if he can be pardoned from this so he can go train in space. And Nezu would just be like, well, I don't see why not, young man. As Izuku, after getting that text, would just tell Aizawa that he's gonna go out and train, and Aizawa would tell him what part of the world he's gonna go to now. As Izuku would say, he's actually gonna go out into the solar system, with Aizawa being like, okay kid, well, whatever. Because this is just shocking. He's like, it's like, bro, there's one thing to be as strong as All Might, and then there's another to say you're literally going out into space and you're gonna like float out there and be able to breathe out there. Like that's insane, you know. But that's literally what's gonna be happening with Izuku, right? So exactly that would happen. Izuku would literally go from world to world to world, flying out in space, like using his destruction energy to destroy a bunch of little meteorites, which were actually heading towards the direction of Earth. So not only did Deku like inadvertently save his planet from a bunch of little asteroids that could have potentially ended up hitting his planet, but Izuku was getting some great training in with all these rocks floating in the air, like flying through them, like evading each and every single one of them, eventually going to different planets and like just destroying them, like exploring, training, and like doing a bunch of really hardcore training until the planets themselves couldn't even hold up and they just blew up, right? This would lead to Izuku like getting a lot stronger than he was even before all of this. And as Izuku would be busy with all of this stuff going down, we would end up having the original situation where like the villains would attack the forest training camp. And because Bakugo's there, there's obviously nothing to worry in terms of like threat level. So a villain like what's the name of that really buff dude? How did I forget this? Like, I literally always talk about this dude. Muscular. Yes, Muscular. Like, when a villain like Muscular would end up appearing in the story and Bakugo has to face off against somebody like him, Bakugo's just so much more prepared than the version of Izuku that we get in the original fight. He would be more along the lines of the one that straight up like one-shotted Muscular with the smoke screen and the black whip in season 7. So Muscular just gets absolutely destroyed, and this would eventually lead to the villains pretty much not being able to capture anybody. right? This would lead to the villains like having to run away with their tails between their legs, and Bakugo just sitting there chilling, like showing that he was here, and if Izuku was not going to be present to stop them, he was. This would kind of send a signal to All For One, showing him that like this next generation is growing so much powerful, and if he wants to like defeat All Might or take one for all, which he thinks might give him a chance to defeat this new up and coming hero Izuku Midoriya, he has to strike now. Like, the time isn't later, but it's now. He has to figure out everything that he can about that young man, and using Aoyama, he would figure out where Izuku lives. This would lead to All For One pretty much taking Inko and Hisashi and pretty much holding them captives. Instead of the pro hero students being the one held captives like in the original, meaning Bakugo, this time around we get Inko and Hisashi. However, fortunately for the heroes, we still had Momo and the Class 1B student plan a tracker on the Nomu. So this led to the heroes knowing what was going down, and Bakugo being taken alongside of them in order to go, take down the villain hero hideout. That would go perfectly successful, just like you would expect in the original, and finally we would have a showdown between All For One, Bakugo, and All Might. And this would be a legendary fight. Like, the only thing that I think I can compare it to would be the fight where Melissa Shield was in, like the David Shield fight, the guy who could like control metals and stuff like Magneto. Do you guys remember when All Might and Deku were like running side by side and they would like both punch through things? That would be so similar to the fight that we're gonna get against All For One, which would eventually end up with All Might punching All For One's mask, like destroying it, and Bakugo coming from behind All For One, like literally blitzing. Like they were both coming at him from like the front, but Bakugo like did like an explosion thing where he shot himself to the left, propelled himself spinning mid-air behind him, redirected himself with another explosion, and elbowed him with an explosion charged up, sending an elbow crashing at his like spine, literally severing it, causing All For One not to be able to move, if not for the fact that he had a crazy regeneration quirk, which even then still left him extremely damaged by the end of everything. And All Might destroyed his breathing supply, so All For One was pretty much taken care of. And what's interesting is like Bakugo managed to do this with One For All way sooner than in the original. Like All For One was defeated, and All Might wasn't even out of commission, meaning he still had another good 1 to 2 years of becoming a pro hero and staying at his tip-top shape. He didn't have to fight the Nomu, and now he didn't have to have that crazy battle against All For One. So he's able to be a pro hero for 1 hour a day, taking out like the small fry, showing that he's still around, all the while Bakugo's gonna be able to graduate and have a good time at school. This would lead to us jumping back into the point of view of Izuku, as Izuku, like I said, would just be destroying meteors and exploring the universe. This would eventually lead to a couple of days passing as Izuku would make his way towards the far end of the southern galaxy, where once he would end up arriving there, Izuku would see planets that just look so uninhabitable. Like there's a difference between uninhabitable planets that are just uninhabitable and then a planet that looks like that was done to it, and Izuku can tell a clear difference. So flying into the stratosphere of each one, Izuku looking at them would feel bad before then just destroying the planets, like realizing that like if they're like this, they're devoid of life and there's no reason for them to stay. So using his finger, he would tap it just to ultimately destroy it, leading to the planets like having like a, like they're gonna be created again by the Supreme Kai, which are alive, but there is no Beerus. Does that make sense? Because he's dead and there is no god of destruction currently. So Izuku, what he would do is continue flying until eventually he would see a planet that has like an explosion going off in like a, you can see it from space basically, like an explosion just went off. So Izuku flies towards it very quickly, hoping to see what exactly is causing all this, and it would be at that moment that he would see a gigantic buff being with long hair that looks similar to Raditz with a monkey tail. Izuku, seeing this, would question what the heck that is, as this being would look at him with red eyes glowing, just staring at him, and it would just murmur, "Strong power level," as it flies in front of Izuku instantly, looking at him before then just pretty much like sizing him up. and then throwing a punch at Izuku's direction. Izuku catching it with one hand as the villain in front of him, you know, the way that he sees things, would just smirk. And Izuku would wonder why the heck that thing's smiling. He just showed it that he's so much superior to it. Before this thing would proceed to like uppercut Deku square in the jaw, sending him flying before flying up above him, grasping both of his hands together and slamming Deku into the face of the planet. This would lead Deku to come out groggily, as this thing would literally slam his foot onto the head of Izuku, like slamming him like he was a carrot back into the ground. At this moment, Deku would look up like super like out of it at this point, as it would like drag him up by his hair, literally like a carrot at this point, as it would hold him up and slap him around saying, "You're a disappointment." But Deku in this moment would flare his aura up to the max, which would cause the entire planet to rumble, and this thing would get so excited. He can see Beerus like behind him as like an aura or like a spirit, you know what I mean? As, you know, this being who now I'm gonna reveal is Cumber, which, like, I'm not gonna lie, the reason that I'm using Cumber is because, like, bro, he's so cool looking. Like, he's so cool looking. He has immortal youth. Like, he has continual youth, so he never ages, which is why he was able to live this long, right? And this would lead to Izuku just like going full throttle at this thing, screaming before then throwing punches and kicks, but this thing would just like shrug them off. And if I needed to put this in a picture for you guys, have you guys seen the Broly movie? Just picture that. Like, he's punching at this dude and nothing's happening. He even blasts a full power Hakai beam, which would be like the size of half the planet at Cumber, who would just disperse it with one hand, before then grabbing both of his wrists, breaking them and telling him to get stronger. As from here, he proceeds to kick Deku down into the ground like with his leg like a sledgehammer, as he would be completely unconscious, and the beings that were on that planet would proceed to nurse Deku back to health over the course of one day. As, you know, Cumber would fly away from that planet expecting a good fight next time, as Deku, you know, who would be completely unconscious, would be being told and scolded by Beerus, telling him why in the world he would fight that thing, being like, that was it, that was him, he needs to get stronger. Like, it just completely annihilated him, and there was not a thing that Deku was able to do. Not a ki blast, not a punch, not a fighting technique he could pull out. There was nothing. He was that much superior to him. And Izuku, like, realizing this, would just be like, the heck do I do? As Beerus would go on to explain that he needs to find Whis, pretty much telling him to fly towards this direction of the universe, as a banged up Izuku would fly towards the direction of Whis, and the second that he would arrive there, Whis, seeing Izuku, can sense his aura and realizes that that must be him. That's the reincarnation of Beerus, as Whis, you know, not having access to his angel powers, wasn't able to look at his staff and see how that was coming or none of that stuff. And the second that Izuku was there, you know, Whis was finally once more like able to like do stuff, as Izuku pretty much was forced to accepting the role of God of Destruction, which would lead to Shin being contacted by Whis via means of like a telepathy or something like, I don't know. He would finally be able to use his staff because this wasn't going to be breaking like a angel law or something like that. And this would essentially lead to like a supreme Kai, not the one that we're used to, like Shin. It would actually be a different one, like his son or something like, or his son's son, which would pretty much lead to Izuku just standing there and being told that, you know, he is going to be the new God of Destruction before he can begin training him. And Izuku would ask why he has to do that, like he's not ready for that responsibility. But Whis would say that he's not able to tap into his angel powers unless he does this. So Izuku begrudgingly would end up becoming the Universe 7's God of Destruction, and this would lead to Whis proceeding to take him into a time chamber in his staff, the same one that Goku and Vegeta would train in, which would lead to Deku training in there over the course of the next 20 years. Whis would beat into him Ultra Instinct, perfected like God of Destruction mode, and when Deku finally comes out, he would have perfected a God of Destruction Ultra Instinct form, which would be beyond the likes of anything that has ever been seen before. His fighting style was literally perfect, and Deku was not taking any chances. Deku's not going out there in search of a good fight. He's going out there in search of destroying this thing that's a danger to the universe. So Deku goes out there once more and just searches for Cumber using Whis' staff, eventually finding him in the middle of the galaxy, which would lead to Izuku flying in front of him and asking him what he thinks about him now. At this point, Izuku would be a full-grown like adult, and he would look just like the one that we have in the thumbnail, because obviously, like, you know, if you're watching this in a part, then this doesn't apply. But if you're watching this when the full movie comes out and like I have my cool little God of Destruction fan art Deku, yeah, he's gonna be looking just like that. So after that would be revealed, Izuku would pretty much tell Cumber that he owes him something, as he would proceed to uppercut Cumber, with Cumber like not even be able to follow it in his base form, followed by slamming him into a planet close by and flying towards it, as he like pretty much like you know, like tackles, like, you know, when you rush at someone's body and you grab them and like slam them through something. Deku would slam him through 3 planets, then proceeding to like spin him by his shirt and slam his knee into him, which would lead to Cumber smiling as blood would be pouring out of his mouth and nose, as he would wipe all of that away and go into his full power state, which would actually cause Deku to smirk himself, thinking that he didn't think he would even be posing a challenge, but apparently he was wrong, saying good. As it would be in this moment that Deku would tap into his full powered state, and instantly holding one hand out, he would say, Hakai! As, bro, Cumber's dead. That's it. Just GG's. Like, it's raps, bro. He proceeded to handle it, and he stood on business like a real life God of Destruction. So after all that would be over, mind you, like, Deku didn't return after the 1 week of like forest training. He straight up was gone for like a month, right? And when he would return, Bakugo would be there, like All Might would be there and all this stuff, and Deku would be just a full-fledged adult. And they're all just like, Deku, like, how long were you gone? And Deku goes on to explain that he was gone for a while with his attendant Whis, as he goes on to pretty much fill them all in on the fact that he's kind of the God of Destruction of this universe now. And they're all gonna be like, what do you mean God of Destruction of this universe? Like, what are you talking about? You're a hero. And Deku's like, yeah, which is why this planet is gonna be the one that I'm gonna be, well, you know, like, in. I don't really feel like living in luxury. It's not really my thing to not be humble, so I'm just gonna be a pro hero while I'm here, and sometimes I won't be on duty because I'm gonna be out there defending the universe, destroying planets. You get the point. As Bakugo, seeing Deku in this like grown-up state, would be like, so you finally did it, huh? You're not a loser anymore. I'm proud of you, Deku. As from here, Izuku would go on a smile and say, oh right, about that. As Whis would tap him with the staff, re-aging him, like de-aging him, so he goes back to how old he was, and he would say, nah, I'm back, Bakugo. As he would let out a little like smile, and Bakugo would be like, well, I'm glad you're back, Deku.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video! Like it or die!
That wasn't the line, Kachan!
Whatever!